In the early days of the PS2, a new genre started to take popularity: open-world adventure games. A big factor in this was the success of Rockstar's Grand Theft Auto 3, which gave a new level of freedom not often seen in console games released before. Numerous games would take direct inspiration from Rockstar's new gameplay model, such as the True Crime series, LucasArts' Mercenaries, or even The Simpsons with The Simpsons Hit and Run. Notably, the sequel to Jak and Daxter, Jak 2, took its dark open-world turn as a direct result of the popularity of GTA 3. Despite an abundance of games influenced by Rockstar's hit, there were also open-world games whose development coincided with and even predated GTA 3. These are some of the more interesting open-world games of the era, since rather than being made as a response to something, they were made simply because these kinds of worlds were being made possible for the first time. Reflections' Driver series had already been well established by 3's late 2001 release. Illusion Softworks' Mafia, which released in 2002, had been in development since 1998. Sega's Shenmue, which released in 1999, had been in development since 1996, and of course, there is Team Soho's The Getaway, which started its life as a PS1 game. Not to be confused with the unrelated 1972 Sam Peckinpah film or its 1994 Alec Baldwin starring remake, The Getaway is a gritty crime thriller set on an accurately recreated 16 square kilometers of London. The game, which is a first-party Sony release, came out in late 2002 in Europe and early 2003 in North America. It tells the story of Mark Hammond, an ex-con who gets dragged back into the world of crime by mob boss Charlie Jolson, after his goons murder Hammond's wife and kidnap his son. In order to get his son back, Mark must travel around London while doing Jolson's bidding, most of which involves shooting up various gang-run locations. One thing that really made The Getaway stand out from its contemporaries is just how adult it is. For one thing, it is extremely bloody. Shooting enemies causes bloodstains to appear on their clothing and blood splatters to appear around them. Of course, that was nothing new at the time. Plenty of games from the prior generation had similar depictions of violence. What definitely was new, however, was this game's language.
What the fuck do we need someone like that on a job like this?
Fucking Charlie.
I fucking swear I'll kill you! Don't leave there until that place is a towering fucking inferno!
You're off your fucking rocker, Charlie. You got some serious fucking nerve.
What you ringing me for? Fuck off! Fucking hell.
I'll fucking do you badly!
That's enough, Harry!
Harry, fucking...
Harry.
Sure, plenty of games from the 90s had said damn and hell, and some had even said shit, but none had gone this far. 2001's Conker's Bad Fur Day did have similar language, but done in a very tongue-in-cheek, South Park-esque way. Also, it was censored.
All I do all day is trying to sort this stupid problems out of the asshole. Anyway.
The Getaway's delivery was like a full-blown, dramatic, R-rated movie. Funny enough, GTA 3, which is fully voice-acted, does not have a single utterance of the F-bomb. I first played this game a few years after it came out, when I was in middle school. Of course, being that age, the high level of adultness was absolutely amazing. I preferred it to the GTA games, in fact. Still, I remember also having to keep it secret, turning the volume down as low as I could when my parents were around, and making sure not to be playing anything other than the driving sections if they happened to come in the room. Of course, by this point I had been watching R-rated Arnold Schwarzenegger movies for years without issue. Still, even compared to those, this game was much more inappropriate. You may have noticed from the cussing montage earlier that this game is very cinematic. Really, aside from Metal Gear Solid 2, no other game from the time came close in film-like presentation. Even if you want to make an argument for something like Shenmue or Final Fantasy X, a large percentage of those games' cutscenes lack realistic movement and facial animations, making them feel much more gamey. The Getaway, on the other hand, went all in with motion capturing. The choreography and staging of these cutscenes holds up surprisingly well, and even outside of the cutscenes, the game has a lot of very satisfying canned animations, mainly in the enemy deaths. At the time, The Getaway was frequently compared to the films of Guy Ritchie, which in the early 2000s was limited to Snatch and Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. with even the game's makers saying they were a source of inspiration.
But we also took a lot of inspiration from 20 years worth of English gangster film. Get Carter, The Long Good Friday with Bob Hoskins and Michael Caine, and then right up to Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrel.
I will say, while they do share a setting and theme, those two movies have much more humor and much lower body counts than The Getaway. In fact, in Snatch, every death happens off-screen. Although they do get serious, they are much less about action and much more about following an assortment of interesting characters as they intersect throughout London's world of crime. And by the way, they are great movies and you should definitely watch both of them. Anyway, I would say The Getaway is much closer in tone to the other films mentioned by the director, Get Carter and The Long Good Friday. Both have darker overall tones that feel a lot more like what the game was going for. And both are also worth giving a watch if you're a fan of the game. Still, I won't say The Getaway is as serious as a Call of Duty game or anything like that. It definitely has its share of humorous moments that are indeed on par with what you'd hear in a Guy Ritchie film. For example, there's this scene.
I thought I told you to stay put. Think I'm doing moron. I'm looking for my kid. What did he call me?
A Mormon.
The fuck's that?
You know, Mormon. Them Bible bashers come round knocking on your door, telling you Jesus is a fucking yank.
You must be losing it, Hammond.
The cutscenes are actually quite well acted. Mark Hamill's actor, Don Kembry, really did a good job of portraying someone acting out of desperation. He's doing a lot of terrible things, but you know he's only doing it because he has no other choice. You really want to see him get out alive with his son. A lot of the performances are great in fact, which includes the antagonists as well. Jolson truly is an evil bastard you want to see taken down, as are his various goons. Speaking of which, there's a line uttered by Hammond towards Jolson early in the game that I strangely quoted all the time.
Jolson, you bastard!
One of the actors, Elwyn Chopper Davis, even appeared in the previously mentioned Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. This game definitely has a feel of cinematic professionalism that wasn't common in the era. The Getaway is fairly stylish, especially in its 60s inspired soundtrack. The music that plays during chases or action scenes is very well done. In fact, I absolutely love the game's main menu music, which was performed by the London Philharmonic Orchestra. So yes, the game's presentation does indeed hold up in a lot of ways. But when it comes to gameplay, things start to feel a lot more dated. The game is about 50% driving and 50% on foot. The driving sections can range from chasing someone, to tailing someone, to just getting somewhere within a time limit. About what you'd expect from this type of game. There are some issues though. Since the game was aiming for realism, your cars will generally start smoking after one crash and maybe take one or two more before the thing breaks down. In keeping with this realism, the handling of the cars can be a bit sluggish, though it depends on the car. Sports cars are much easier to handle. Strangely, cars in this game seemingly can't be flipped over. Outside of cutscenes, that is. Your tires also can go out incredibly easily. Police will set up barricades to take out your tires, enemies will shoot your tires out, and most annoyingly, if you ram into someone too hard, that can be enough to make your tires go out as well. You can still drive after this, but it sure is annoying having to constantly correct your steering. Of course, even without that problem, the handling of the cars could have been better. The absolute worst thing about driving is how the police react when aware to your presence. 100% of the time, they will swerve into your path, often causing a collision. Like I said before, these cars are incredibly fragile. You'll often need to switch cars after taking one of these hits. Honestly, just be ready to switch cars all the time if you play this game. Of course, I did say aware to your presence. They won't notice you if you drive at a safe speed, stop at stoplights, and, well, don't drive on the sidewalk. Mafia also treated its driving in this manner. This was a time before developers seemed to realize players generally don't enjoy this level of realism. Personally, I prefer the on-foot sections. Although predated by such games as Koei's Winback Covert Operations and Namco's light gun shooter, Time Crisis, The Getaway is one of the earlier examples of a cover-based shooter. When near a corner or obstacle, just press X to take cover, then pop back out and take a shot when you see an opening. It's not super necessary though, as you can just walk out in the open, strafing to avoid getting shot. The way you shoot mainly relies on an auto-aim system. Hold R1 to ready your gun, then press square to shoot, similar to the Siphon Filter series. Since you will aim at the nearest enemy even if they're off camera, you may find yourself constantly pressing R1 to make sure no one surprises you. You can also hold R2 to use an over-the-shoulder manual aim. Considering the auto-aim is very accurate, this mode is usually only necessary for enemies at extreme distances or when trying to shoot exploding barrels or other non-human objects. These controls are very much rooted in the PS1 era. As I said, the shooting mechanics have a lot of similarities with Sony's big action series from the system, Siphon Filter. But there's also the fact that there is absolutely no camera control with the right analog stick. You can use the right stick to accelerate and brake when driving, but that's the extent of its use in the game. The camera simply stays behind you. When you turn around, it does as well. Now, it doesn't really ruin the game or anything, but it may be The Getaway's most dated aspect. With all that said about what's dated, there are some other uncommon aspects that could be seen as pluses. One of the cooler things about the game's combat is the lack of a HUD. To feel more immersive and film-like, there's no health bar or ammo counter on screen. Instead, you rely on your character's appearance. The more they get shot, the bloodier they get. They also have 2 stages of limping. When near death, they're very slow and you can tell they're about to die. It's pretty similar to how Resident Evil handled its lack of a HUD. Unlike Resident Evil though, there's no inventory to see how much ammo you have. Unless you're really keeping track of things, it's basically just guessing. That could have been handled better, but I do like the health system. You may be wondering how you heal. Well, it's kind of like the ancestor to the now common regenerating health system. Now, you don't heal automatically when walking around, as is the case now. What you need to do is stand near a wall, after which you will begin leaning against it to take a breath. You'll notice that the blood stains on your clothes slowly start disappearing, and after a while, you'll be fully healed. It's not a bad system, except for the fact that it takes a very long time to finish. Just watch this. Yeah, not quite as player-friendly as today's regenerating health. Also, being that this wasn't a common staple in gaming at the time, and the fact that the used copy of The Getaway I had didn't include a manual, I actually had no idea you could heal in this game. Thanks to the lack of a proper tutorial, and me being too dumb to read the hints displayed in the pause menu, I played through almost half the game without realizing I could do this. It's not impossible though. If you want a challenge when playing the game, try beating each level without healing. Another thing I didn't realize about this game for some time was how it told you to get to your destination. Your car's turn signal will start flashing whenever you need to turn. Just keep following that until you get to where you need to go. There's no map, so aside from the missions where you're following someone, this is the only way of knowing how to get somewhere. Before I realized this was going on, I think I just aimlessly drove around for quite a while sometimes, until I stumbled upon where I was supposed to go. Luckily, I'm pretty sure I figured this out a lot faster than the healing system. Still, that's the gist of the game's now very archaic gameplay. It has its issues, and can feel a bit unnatural in a lot of ways, but it's acceptable, and worth putting up with if you're interested in seeing how the story unfolds. And it does unfold in an interesting way. Hammond eventually is tasked to kill Yasmin, an assassin, who he instead teams up with in order to find a way to get the upper hand on Jolson. Along the way, they also cross paths with Frank Carter, a detective who's equally hell-bent on taking the mob boss down. At the end, all three wind up on a docked cargo ship, along with all the gangs Jolson has been tasking you to shoot up. After an intense scene where it initially looks like Hammond is going down for everything he was forced to do, the main gang leader takes pity on you, instead giving Jolson the full blame he deserves. Leaving Carter behind, you get off the boat with Yasmin and Hammond's son, the boat explodes, and that's the end of Hammond's story. However, that's not the end of the game. The Getaway actually has a completely separate campaign that is unlocked after finishing the story with Hammond. The second story stars Carter, the detective who had crossed paths with Hammond, and takes place concurrently during his story. Carter's story resolves all the loose ends from Hammond's campaign, including what happened when the boat exploded. This is yet another thing I had no idea about due to not having the manual, and I'm kind of glad it came as a surprise. I mean, imagine thinking you beat a game only to find out there's a whole separate campaign. Of course, there are other games that intentionally did this as a surprise, such as Castlevania: Symphony of the Night, but it's still memorable if you happen to be in my situation. I almost think they should have made it a surprise. Although Carter isn't quite as likable of a character as Hammond, I find his campaign to be much more solid in comparison. There's more action and better set pieces, such as his opening scene set in a rundown apartment building, or a much later scene set in a hospital. One thing I kind of like is how the two characters play a bit differently. When disposing of a hostage, Hammond shoots them in the head or breaks their neck. Kinda harsh. Carter, on the other hand, simply handcuffs them. There's also the huge benefit in that because Carter is a police officer, he's not constantly getting slammed into by the cops. In fact, they'll just give you their cars if you need them. This makes getting to your destinations much less time-consuming or boring. I almost feel like it would have been more fitting if Carter's campaign had been first. However, story-wise, it does make more sense to start with Hammond. One thing that the Getaway and open-world games that started development before GTA 3 have in common is that despite being set in an open world, they are far more linear than the GTA games. They generally are built around a large open world, but send you on one individual mission after another throughout their huge environments. The Getaway is no exception. I can understand why this could be disappointing if you're used to modern open world games, but it's almost a relief in a way. You don't have to worry about unlocking every item on the map because, well, that's not the point of the game. There's no filler put in to pad out the game's length. You just play it until it's finished. Of course, if you really want to explore the Getaway's recreation of London, the game does have a free roaming mode. In that case, the lack of collectibles does stand out a bit more, but that mode's really a bonus more than anything, and shouldn't be anyone's main reason to play the game. The only recent example of an open world game done in this vein that I can think of is the 2020 remake of Mafia. If somehow you like the sounds of what I've been talking about, or are a fan of the Getaway, you might want to check that one out. It has a very similar structure. At the time of release, the Getaway mainly received between average to very positive reviews. The outlets that gave it more average reviews tended to criticize the gameplay while praising the story. The more positive reviews simply didn't mind the gameplay as much and enjoyed the game's immersive, film-like presentation. While I was a bit hesitant of how I felt about the game when I started my recent playthrough, I eventually did find that I was really enjoying myself by the time I finished Carter's campaign. Once you get down the game's mechanics, it's pretty easy to get into. Okay, the game does have some downright awful stealth segments that I failed to bring up before that may hurt some people's overall impression of the game. And there is a level with poison gas that is activated by motion detecting lasers that's just bizarre considering the realism the game strived for. But those make up such a small portion of the game that it's hard to not get too much for them. Overall, I really do like this game. If you go in with open eyes, being well aware that it truly is a product of its time, you may just have a good time with this one. Now, with how huge Grand Theft Auto 3 and its first sequel, Vice City War, by the time the Getaway came out, it's no surprise that it sold fairly well. In fact, it did well enough to warrant a sequel. In late 2004 in Europe and early 2005 in North America, the PS2 would see the release of The Getaway: Black Monday. Although this sequel does see a few returning side characters from the first game, such as Elwyn Davis's character, Jamal, for the most part it is a standalone experience that doesn't require you to play the first entry to understand what's going on. As with the first Getaway, the game is set in an open-world recreation of London, following multiple characters on opposite sides of the law, but the order you play them in is reversed. This time, the game starts with you playing as Ben Mitchell, or Mitch as he's known, a law enforcer just returning to the job 1 year after having shot a teen in the back, still haunted by the experience. If you come to this from playing the first game, you will immediately notice that it has a very different feel, with the movement of the characters feeling much more responsive. It's a bit hard to explain, but they feel much less restricted. Doing things like taking cover or simply turning around feels much more natural. They also let you control the camera with the right analog stick this time, though it is implemented in a bit of an odd way where you can't rotate it around the character, just the position it's in behind their back. The shooting in Black Monday feels a bit different too. Unlike the first game's very accurate auto-aim, the auto-aim here isn't quite as precise, which depending on how much of a challenge you want could be a plus. It definitely gives you more of a reason to use the game's manual aim. You also don't automatically aim at enemies who aren't in front of you, which again makes the action a bit more challenging. Lastly, you aim and lower your gun much quicker, which makes shooting from cover a much more useful option than the first game. Unlike the first Getaway, you can switch between two weapons this time, which is a big plus. Mitch has a submachine gun and a pistol that you can alternate between by pressing the R3 button. Being that Mitch is a cop, he can't pick up enemy weapons, just their ammo. This isn't a big deal though, as his two guns are pretty fun to use. An even bigger improvement is the game's driving. Vehicles turn much more easily, making avoiding cars less of a hassle, and thus making the driving segments much more enjoyable. It's not just that though, you can now shoot while driving, which is a very welcome addition, especially considering in both games you can get shot at by other cars. The vehicles are sturdier now too, with cars not breaking down and tires not going out quite as easily, which is, again, a big improvement. And the game added drivable motorcycles as well. On top of this improved driving is the addition of a racing mode, along with collectible car keys you can find during story missions that unlock new vehicles in said mode. If you were disappointed with the first game's non-existent collectibles, well, at least Black Monday has you covered. And if all those additions to the game's traversal weren't enough, Black Monday even added a world map that you can view when the game is paused. This definitely gives you a better idea of where you're going and how far it is from your current location. The first game could have really used this. One more difference is Black Monday's healing system. Again, you heal by leaning onto walls, with you now being able to heal when ducking under certain cover as well. Thankfully, you heal much faster this time. One big change is that you can now only heal to a certain degree before it's no longer possible. At this point, you need to pick up one of the game's medical kits, which are scattered throughout the levels, to fully heal and regain your regeneration ability. You know, it is kind of weird saying you have a regeneration ability in these super grounded games, but that's what it is. One last thing that I suppose you could say is improved upon is the adultness. The game not only features the non-stop cussing, but this time even features, drumroll, 3D polygonal boobs. Yes, this was definitely a standout for middle school me, who was equally wowed by this, but also even more worried about my parents walking in than ever before. Now, unlike the first game, Black Monday has the honor of being immortalized in film. In what is widely regarded as one of the greatest works of cinematic history, 2007's Superbad, there's a scene where Michael Cera is playing a PS2. If you were like me at the time, you were like, holy shit, it's The Getaway Black Monday!
You know I have to kill these guys because you don't negotiate with terrorists.
Okay, that always bothered me. They're not terrorists, Michael Cera, they're gangsters.
Fuck me! I can't... That's fun. Why do they make that if you can't even win? Then why am I fucking playing?
The level he was playing in said scene was Mitch's third level, which takes place at a junkyard. Overall, Mitch's campaign is pretty solid. He's an interesting, if overly intense character, whose levels are pretty fun to play through. if you're like me during my first playthrough, or even my most recent, you may have been thinking, this game is pretty good. If this keeps up, it'll likely be better than the first. Well, it doesn't keep up. Things quickly take a dive when the game switches to its second of 3 protagonists, Eddie O'Connor, a boxer, who along with a crew pull a heist at an office building. As you'd expect, it doesn't quite go according to plan. Unlike Mitch's campaign, which focuses on shooting, Eddie's campaign immediately has you facing your foes unarmed, since, you know, he's a boxer. Well, that doesn't matter, because this game has some of the worst hand-to-hand combat on the PS2. There's absolutely no strategy to it, just keep mashing square, or even better, just grab them and fling them away to hilarious effect. Seriously, look. This game came out just when ragdoll physics were starting to take off, and it shows. Now, there are plenty of good examples of games with ragdoll physics from the PS2 era, but this is not one of them. In fact, it might just have some of the weirdest I've ever seen. When enemies die, they'll just slide to the floor like a wet noodle. You won't find anyone hunched up against a wall, which can happen when these kind of physics are done right. What you will see though are enemies hovering over each other if they die too close together. It seems like there's some sort of invisible barrier around dead enemies that other dead enemies can't enter, leading to some really strange looking deaths. That said, Eddie's campaign is also where you can finally start using the game's various guns. And there are a lot to choose from, with numerous types of pistols, machine guns, and shotguns abound. This, however, seems to be to the game's detriment. There seems to be a hierarchy of firearms, with you automatically picking up a stronger one when you walk over it. That was also the case in the first game, but that game literally only had 4 guns, making it not much of an issue. In this game, you'll constantly be dropping one weapon when you walk over another, whether you want to or not. It simply happens because it's apparently a better weapon. If you have a shotgun and would rather use it than a machine gun, you better watch where you walk. It's even weirder when it's the same class of gun. Apparently, this one is better than this one. I mean, imagine if the Uncharted games did this. It would suck. This system made more sense with the first game's very limited arsenal. Honestly, Mitch's section, with its 2 non-exchangeable weapons and lack of melee fighting, makes for much smoother gameplay. Black Monday really could have benefited from some kind of prompt to let you pick up the weapons you want, though I suppose that would have been hard with the lack of a HUD or on-screen icons. Still, it would have been better than constantly tapping L3 to drop every weapon you accidentally pick up. It might be hard to believe, but the hand-to-hand combat isn't the worst thing about Black Monday's gameplay. Remember those crappy stealth sections from the first game that I briefly mentioned? Well, Black Monday's stealth makes those look good. There's actually a third playable character, Sam, whose sections entirely revolve around sneaking in and out of places. Unlike the other characters, Sam can't use any weapons, cause she's a girl, and everyone knows girls can't use guns. Apparently. Sam's areas are so poorly thought out and designed, with there often being no clear path you should take, coupled with nonsensical enemy AI and placement. I mean, look at this. What a nice water cooler. Okay, that's pretty funny. Seriously though, there are many instances where it seems like the only way you can go is the one where you have to be seen. Getting through these levels is basically a matter of trial and error, but most importantly, luck. And they can be pretty torturous to play through. Yeah, it sure is fun switching from a character who's able to obliterate everyone he comes across to a defenseless one whose only option is running away. I hated going through these levels on my original playthrough, and I hated them just as much now. But at least this time I can use save states. I will say, Black Monday does at least wrap up a bit more nicely than the first game, with an ending that actually feels like an ending. Or, I guess I should say, endings, because when playing as Eddie, there are multiple story paths that affect the game's final outcome. However, the game definitely could have done a better job of letting you know these important moments are actually decisions you can make. There's one point where there's a lady hanging off a ledge that you need to make sure Eddie saves in order to avoid an ending where he has to kill Mitch. You may inadvertently get a bad ending if you don't realize you can walk up to her and help her up. There's another point where Sam wants you to take her somewhere, but if you get out of the car, this too will lead to a bad ending where she dies. Considering Black Monday is a game where you constantly switch cars, it really should have done a better job of letting you know about this. With Black Monday's lack of a HUD or any kind of indicators or text on screen, the game almost self-sabotaged itself in these moments. The first game, being more simple, got away with having no HUD and handled it decently well. This game's added complexities just don't work with this system. I can't help but think this game was rushed. The first game, which was initially supposed to be a PS2 launch title, was given an extra 2 years for development. That game is flawed, sure, but it is still much more refined for what it is, and feels far less janky all around. The story feels equally sloppy, in fact. Everyone's going after some MacGuffin. I guess it's some artifact called the Icon. What is this, Indiana Jones? Apparently they just want it because there's some diamonds inside. It just seems like kind of a lazy plot device compared to the first game, which admittedly is simple, but more effective than this. A lot of the story is poorly thought out like that. Like, why are there so many big shootouts in the game that lead straight into a cutscene where you're eavesdropping on someone as if they've heard nothing? There's also the fact that once you switch over to Eddie, you play up to the point where Mitch's campaign ends, but then go far beyond it. The first game, in contrast, has you see the entire story from both perspectives. I can't help but think they wanted to do the same thing here, but somehow ran out of time, budget, or both. I mean, the final level in the game starts with a cutscene of Mitch chasing Eddie in a boat, something that sure seems like it would have been fun from Mitch's perspective. Maybe boats were planned to be drivable in the game. All that, combined with the fact that Black Monday only takes around 6 hours to beat, gives me a pretty good feeling that quite a bit of content had to be cut. Had this game gotten an extra year for development, I think it could have been pretty good. Maybe they would have had time to give Mitch equal screen time, as well as improve the physics, and especially improve the terrible stealth segments. There's also a section where Sam drives while Eddie shoots that's just so bad that really could have used some refinement. They could have spent some time developing the characters of Eddie and Sam as well. I was never really given a good reason to root for them aside from their friends getting killed and them needing to get back at the culprits. Mitch, at least, had his redemption thing going. It's made worse if you go the route where both Mitch and Sam end up dead because of Eddie's assholishness. I guess how much he sucks is up to you, but even when you go the nice route and get the game's good ending, you're still left with scenes like this.
Don't think I won't break your neck, you scrawny bitch!
Here's the one character you have to see live no matter what. I guess Mitch does point his gun at a few undeserving people, but this dude cranks it up to another level. I could go on and on about this game's issues all day. So much of Black Monday is severely underdeveloped, and it's, unfortunately, a mess. For as many improvements as the game brought, its bad aspects still far outweigh the good, which is truly a shame. And in case you're wondering, no, this game did not review as favorably as its predecessor at the time of its release, receiving mostly average to negative reviews. If you liked the first Getaway, I'd recommend at least giving Mitch's chapters a go. They have the super bad seal of approval. The rest of the game, well, play if you dare. Despite their clunkiness, it's still worthwhile to check out the Getaway games for how ahead of their time they were. If anything, at least try the first. The games paved the way for more realistically presented narratives in games. Even MGS, for how much more groundbreaking and influential it was, had a very cartoony and gamey feel underneath. Not that that's a bad thing. The Getaway truly felt like an R-rated movie turned into a game, which had never been done quite as well before, at least not on consoles. These games really were important stepping stones in getting more adult themes, content, and storylines in games. I've seen Grand Theft Auto San Andreas referred to in that way, but while it certainly was a much more culturally significant game, it did come out a whole 2 years later. Considering how much comparably mild GTA's content was before the Getaway's release, it wouldn't be too surprising if Rockstar saw what Team Soho was doing and were like, we can do that too. If you want to play these games now, There's currently no official way to buy either, so you'll either need to play the original PS2 version or go with emulation. In my gameplay of the first game, you may have noticed a difference in quality between the footage of Hammond's campaign and Carter's. Both were played on PCSX2, but when playing through the two campaigns, I decided to go through Hammond's using hardware mode, upscaling and graphical improvements and all, and Carter's using software mode, which is basically identical to how the game would have looked when playing on a PS2. Graphically speaking, for an early PS2 game, The Getaway looks pretty good. Not quite as impressive as Metal Gear Solid 2, but certainly better looking than GTA 3. I mean, the characters here actually have fingers rather than a blob of skin for a hand. The second looked even better. In modern day context, The Getaway's graphics are a bit more fitting in original resolution. There are certain cases, such as the Silent Hill games, which look absolutely amazing when played at a higher resolution, but The Getaway really shows its age when viewed this way. A big contributing factor to this is that playing on hardware mode currently isn't perfect, and loses some shadows that would be present otherwise, so it looks a bit flat. It's playable though. Black Monday, on the other hand, has severe graphical glitches during many cutscenes and certain instances during gameplay, so it really only works in software mode. So yes, I recommend playing these games on either original hardware or software mode on PCSX2, at least until the graphical glitches can get worked out. Although the Getaway series never got another entry by name, it did get a portable spin-off with the PSP game Gangs of London, a game that has you picking a side in a violent gang war over who can claim control of London. It may sound similar to the Getaway games on paper, but trust me, with its use of a HUD, comic book style cutscenes, and a structure much more typical of your average open world game, it is a very different experience. A third game for the series was announced in 2006 for PS3, being developed by Team Soho's successor, London Studio. It looked promising and even received a tech demo and trailer, but unfortunately the game was ultimately cancelled. London Studio seemed to have terrible luck in the PS3 era, as they also had another very promising looking game, 8 Days, that seemed to have a similar vibe to The Getaway, but that was cancelled as well. And seriously, look up its trailer. There was a time in high school when I must have watched it at least once a day. Since the cancelled PS3 game, there hasn't been another officially announced game in the series. Though, the 2019 PSVR game Blood and Truth supposedly started its life as a Getaway game, with its original 2015 demo even being titled London Heist: The Getaway. Still, there's no official connection. While there may not have been any direct follow-ups to the series since Black Monday, the makers of the games have at least gone on to work on some projects of note. Katie Elwood, co-writer of both Getaway games, went on to have a successful film career, working on such projects as the Hawkeye TV series. And, as is well known at this point, a large number of Team Soho staff would form Team Bondi, the studio behind LA Noire. The Getaway games really do have a unique feel for their time, and even compared to the games of today, there hasn't really been a gritty crime-centered action game along these lines since, well, the game I brought up a bit earlier, Mafia. But aside from that, it seems to be a topic that's sorely missing. I'd love to see a remake of the first two games, or even a full-blown sequel. They would probably have to drop the no HUD thing though. Still, I think they could give the same vibe if they went for a minimalist one, showing only an aiming reticle and ammo counter in as unintrusive of a way as possible. I really think the series could be amazing if done using modern technology. Hopefully some wildcard executive at Sony decides to okay a new entry, but only time will tell. And even if that doesn't happen, I will almost certainly come back someday and give the games another playthrough. Yes, even Black Monday. And you know what? You should too. Hopefully this was an enjoyable watch for everyone. This was my first shot at a series review, with more planned for release in the future, including much longer lasting series such as ones from the RPG genre. If you liked this, be sure to subscribe to see more like it in the future. It would be much appreciated. Fans of the channel may also want to consider supporting it on Patreon for early access footage, a chance to pick games for review, and more. Well, I think that about wraps things up. As always, thanks for watching The Legend of Games.